Hi, and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, I'll be featuring the case of Rod Ferrell in the Vampire Clan. This was a suggestion by friend of the show, Brian. Thank you, Brian, for the recommendation. Now, let's go ahead and find out more. Let's go ahead and dive on in. Roderick Justin Ferrell was born on March 28, 1980, in Mary, Kentucky. His parents were just teenagers when he was born. He was raised by his mother, Sandra Gibson, but he barely knew his father because he joined the military soon after he was born. Sandra and Rod lived on and off with her parents over the years. Rod would claim that he was raped by his grandfather at the age of 5 years old. However, no criminal charges have ever been filed against him. When Sandra and Rod lived on their own, they lived in public housing. Sandra supported the two of them by working as an exotic dancer, and she would occasionally do work as a sex worker. Sandra was into vampire fantasy. When Rod became a teenager, he became into that too. Specifically, he was a fan of fantasy role-playing games, some being, and I'm sure you've heard of it, Dungeons and Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade. Rod became friends with other teenagers who claimed to be living similar vampire lifestyles. They all wore black, listened to gothic and industrial music, and of course, they drank each other's blood. One of Rod's friends, Stephen Murphy, known as Jaden, was older than him. Jaden had sired Rod and crossed him over as a vampire in a ritual that involved the drinking of blood. Sandra had sent letters to Jaden's 14-year-old brother saying that she would be his, quote, bride for eternity, end quote, as part of the vampire family. What? Around 1990, Sandra and Rod moved between Murray, Kentucky and Eustis, Florida. This was because Sandra's parents acquired a home in that area of Florida. Rod now became friends with Heather Wendorf. She was known as a troubled high school sophomore student who rebelled against her parents when they wanted her to do simple tasks like clean her room and other minor household chores. For the 10th grade, Rod moved back to Kentucky. However, he was still in contact with Heather because he would call her collect. However, this still ran up expensive phone bills, so Heather's parents put an end to the phone calls. This made Heather, quote, very angry, according to her sister. Rod now told people that he was a 500-year-old vampire named Sago. He began recruiting followers. One of Rod's followers was 16-year-old Howard Scott Anderson. He had a troubled upbringing, coming from a life of poverty. He had an alcoholic father who would abuse his mother. Rod's behavior was now becoming increasingly unpredictable. One example, October 1996. He broke into the Murray-Callaway County Animal Shelter and he killed 2 puppies. What the hell? November 1996. Rod, his 16-year-old girlfriend Charity Kesey, his follower Howard Anderson, and another girl, 19-year-old Dana Cooper, drove to Eustis, Florida in Howard's car. They all went together to pick up Heather Wendorf. Rod thought he was saving Heather from a troubled home because she had told him her parents were abusing her and she wanted to run away. So Rod fantasized that they would all move to New Orleans and live together as a vampire family. November 25th, 1996, in a Eustis, Florida cemetery, Heather said she crossed over to become a vampire after drinking Rod's blood. Rod then took LSD and went to Heather's parents' home to steal their car for the group trip to New Orleans. Heather stated that she told Rod, quote, I don't want you messing with my parents. Just leave them alone, end quote. Rod and Howard went to the home and they went into the house through the garage. Rod had a crowbar with him. They came upon 49-year-old Richard Wendorf asleep on the couch. Rod struck him repeatedly on the head, bludgeoning him to death. Naoma, the mother, had been showering in another part of the home. She now came into the living room. She threw a cup of hot coffee on Rod. This pissed him off, so he attacked her. He struck her so hard with the crowbar, it severed her brainstem. It killed her instantly. Richard and Neoma were then given ritualistic burns. Ron and Howard then searched the house for valuables. They left after they stole credit cards, some jewelry, and of course, the family's blue Ford Explorer. Later that night, Jennifer Wendorf, Heather's 17-year-old sister, she'd gotten off work and came home. There, she discovered their parents' dead bodies. Now, November 27th, 1996, arrest warrants for murder were issued for all 5 teens: Rod Ferrell, Howard Anderson, Charity Kesey, Dana Cooper, and Heather Wendorf. November 28th, 1996, after being on the run for 4 days, police finally caught up with the group. They were found in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This was because Charity had decided to call a family member. Rod claimed to police he was being framed by a rival group of vampires, that he had multiple personalities, and that he was, quote, trying to ditch being a vampire, end quote. He also had burn marks on the body in the shape of a V. The V was Rod's symbol. They accompanied a dot for each person he considered to be in his vampire cult. February 12, 1998, Rod, now 17 years old, pled guilty to 2 counts of felony murder. He claimed that the others traveling with him were all innocent, except for Howard Anderson. However, he was just simply an accessory. Rod's attorneys tried to argue that he was insane and that being diagnosed with several mental disorders, including schizotypal personality disorder and Asperger's syndrome. Judge Jerry T. Lockett finally sentenced Rod Ferrell to death. Lockett said to Rod, quote, "I think you are a disturbed young man. I think your family failed you. I think society failed you," end quote. Howard Anderson was convicted of the same charges as Rod. However, he was sentenced to life in prison. Charity Kesey was convicted of 2 counts of third-degree murder, robbery with a gun or deadly weapon, and burglary with a weapon or explosive. She was sentenced to 10.5 years in state prison. Dana Cooper was convicted of those same charges. However, she was given a 17.5-year prison sentence. Now that leaves one person, Heather Wendorf. Twice, grand juries declined to press charges against her for having any part in the murder of her parents. November 2000, the Florida Supreme Court reduced Rod's sentence to life in prison. This was because Florida, having long abolished parole, so his sentence was without it. March 2006, Charity Kesey was now released from prison. October 2011, Dana Cooper, she was now released from prison. In January 2013, the appellate court dismissed attempts by Rod Ferrell and Howard Anderson to get new sentence hearings. In December 2018, Howard Anderson, however, was now resentenced by Circuit Judge Don Briggs to 40 years in prison. He was also given credit for the 22 years that he had already served. He will first be eligible for release in the year 2031. April 2020, Rod had a resentencing hearing. The judge upheld his life without parole sentence and deemed him irreparably corrupt. Rod Ferrell is incarcerated in Tacoma Correctional Institution. And that is the case of Rod Ferrell and the Vampire Clan. Thank you for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. And thank you, Brian, for the recommendation. Do you guys have any questions or comments on this case? Leave it down below. Let's be interactive. Do you have a suggestion for a case that you'd like me to cover? Well, leave it down below in the comments. You may see it featured in an upcoming episode. Until next time, remember, We don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us.